You are now listening to The Unwavering, the movement dedicated to educating and empowering the brave men and women who have or are still serving our great nation. What's up, everyone? Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of The Unwavering. Quick shout out to all the veterans, active duty service members, and family members who support them. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to our co-host, Gerard, and let him introduce himself.
Hey guys, Gerard Garcia. I was in the Air Force for right about 8 years, 7.5 years or so. I was aircraft maintenance and did a lot of QA work while I was in as well. And that's kind of led me to where I'm at today.
For those of you guys who haven't heard Gerard's voice in a while, we're privileged he was able to come into the studio. He's in Los Angeles for the week for work, so he's been spending some late nights at the studio with us. Gerard, thank you for coming in. Today, we have someone that I spoke to on the podcast previously, my good friend Zach. And for those of you guys who have heard Zach before on the episode called Wounded Warriors, he's here today to talk to us again about some of those tough subjects: mental health, suicide prevention, and just what it's like actually being injured and the road to recovery. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to my friend Zach.
What's up, everybody? My name's Zach. I was active duty Marine for 12 years. I was H-1 avionics tech and homegrown crew chief.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us. I know it's difficult with the time change and stuff, you being on the East Coast, but we truly appreciate you coming on board, especially for a subject as tough to speak about as this. I think it's super important, and I'm glad that there's people like you that are willing to talk about your stories, your experiences, because in my personal opinion, I really feel like us as a community have built such a negative stigma around people asking for help when they're facing severe depression, anxiety, or even suicidal thoughts. I'm pretty sure that all of us sitting here today, and even a lot of the listeners, have lost someone to suicide and lost someone who could have potentially been saved if someone was there to extend their hand and help them through those tough times. So I can't be grateful enough for you coming on here and being able to speak about this. As we mentioned earlier, you did do a previous episode with our friend Mark and myself talking about what it's like being a wounded warrior and some of the things that you went through during that time. But I really want to dive deeper into it, talking more about some of the programs that the Wounded Warrior Project offers, as well as like the Red Cross or any other people who helped you when you were seeking help after your helicopter crash and, having that traumatic brain injury. So the first thing I want to get started is, can you kind of describe after the helicopter crash, and we're kind of telling a story again for the people who haven't heard it, but you went through the helicopter crash several years ago. You ended up getting help later on in your career. What kind of changes did you notice from the time of your crash till several years later when you finally got help? Was it family or friends that began to take notice? Did you get to see that you were changing? Like, what kind of sparked you to say, enough's enough, I need help?
It was a little bit of both, really. I didn't notice it so much myself. I wasn't catching on to it. But looking back, I can definitely tell you I was losing a little bit of myself every year or month, days, whatever. I could notice myself kind of just pulling away from everything. I was really good at putting on the face and making it look like everything was okay. Everybody at work thought I was good. I was still doing my job, still, doing everything. But, when I went home on my off time, I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting at home, just wasting time doing everything else. It finally took, my family saying that I wasn't right, having a straight up conversation with me about what's going on. My wife straight up asked me, "You've not been yourself. This isn't who you are. Are you thinking about doing anything stupid?" It was just a real heart-to-heart conversation. It really opened up my eyes. It happened in 2012, the crash. And I didn't really formally seek out help until the middle of 2016. So over that 4-year span, I really just kind of lost who I was.
Hey,
It
Zach,
really bled into that home life.
Sorry to interrupt you. It just kind of sparked a question in my mind. So from the time that you first went through the accident until the time that you sought help because of having other people notice that, and also it going off in your head once they noticed it, you did realize that some of that stuff was a big change. Was it kind of a gradual thing, or did it happen all at once? I'm just wondering, did it affect you immediately? Did it seem like it was that bad? Has it gotten worse since?
No, it was subtle. The crash happened while I was on deployment, right? And through the circumstances, I was only off the flight schedule for like a week and a half, and then I was right back on it. So it was kind of like, if you related to like concussion protocol in the NFL, I cleared concussion protocol. So really, I didn't have any time to open it up and deal with it at the time. With me not opening up and really talking through it or really wanting to acknowledge that it happened, I just wanted it to go away. I didn't want it to affect me. I didn't want anybody to think I was weak or anything like that. Like I said, I put on a brave face. The symptoms and stuff started out real subtle. And then because I just never opened up that box, they just kept compounding until finally I broke. Everything kind of fell apart in 2016.
When you said that you wanted it to go away, this is something that I'm sure you've heard a lot, I've heard a lot, I'm sure Gerard has as well. Do you think that it was to some degree you were scared of the repercussions? Like, were you scared that the command would look at you differently, the team would look at you differently, they would treat you differently, or maybe there would be a negative action like they're going to send you back home because you can't be on deployment? Were those some of the fears that you had?
Oh, for sure. And I still struggle with those same fears today. I've come a long ways from when I first thought I'd help, but I still, those negative thoughts that I know I give myself too. Like, for example, like if I'm late to work, right? Just something as simple as being late to work. And in Northern Virginia, that's an everyday thing, right? Like it's like the one thing. If you're late to work, you can say, it was the traffic. Traffic was the cause. And they'll be like, oh, no big deal, whatever. And to me, I would take that action of me being late, and then I would assign like a negative thought towards it, like saying, oh, I'm jacked up, or I messed up everybody else's schedule because I was selfish and was late. You know what I mean? So like not wanting to deal with things or wanting to forget about it started with me portraying those negative thoughts about myself, which then just kind of made everything else worse. Because if you focus on the negative of I'm messed up, I'm not functioning right, I can't remember things, or I have anxiety and depression, then you start really thinking and convincing yourself you have it. So I didn't want the command to know what I was going through because I was fearful of, one, being kicked out of the military, two, being pulled away from the unit and a job, and three, most importantly, I didn't want the people that I was leading to think any less of me. So pretty much between everything for me and those negative thoughts I was having about myself, about downfalls and shortcomings of who I was as a person, made everything else worse. I just felt like I was digging a hole deeper and deeper and deeper.
I think that is so huge, and I think it's big enough where we'll probably hit it harder in the future, maybe on a future episode, but the idea of suppressing some of the things that you know are an issue just because of how you're going to be perceived or the potential repercussions like you were talking about, that's huge. And Zach, if I can kind of ask you a little bit more, so we talked about the mental side of how all of this stuff affected you. How about the physical side? I struggle with anxiety as well. So when I first got a panic attack for the first time, or when I have little episodes of like serious anxiety, sometimes it comes out in different ways. Did you notice things like that?
Yes, but nobody can completely connect it to just a mental health issue because I did suffer a traumatic brain injury. I have some permanent brain damage. It's on the cognitive processing side of my brain. So, and those symptoms, when they manifest, they kind of blur into each other, right? So the symptoms kind of mix in. It's hard to tell from the TBI related, is it depression, anxiety, PTSD? But for sure, I noticed I have issues with trying to get the words from my brain to my mouth. And that's just the just the functioning part of the brain. Trying to get the words out and everything. But, I get headaches pretty regularly, bad enough to where, you got to lay down and I'm out for the day. And it kind of sucks. You end up missing some days of work, but, my work's pretty understanding. Vision's good. I can walk. I have good balance. It's really just like thought processing and speech, I guess, that I kind of struggle with.
I know we were going to get away from the topic about the stigma asking for help, but I think it's super important, so I want to hop back on it because in my eyes, this podcast is dedicated towards military members, towards their family members. But Zach, you and I have talked about this, and this issue is so universal that when people are in desperate need of help, they're in a position where help is the one thing that they should ask for. They shouldn't try and tough it out. They don't. And like Gerard said, it's for two reasons. One, either fear of repercussions, or two, fear of being judged. And a recent example of that, Kevin Hart, when he was in that car accident. In my mind, that is a serious car accident. Looking at the wreckage, there's no way that he walked away without having some serious issues. But everything that I was reading, all the interviews that he had after the wreck were saying, I'm fine, I'm good, there's no issue. in my mind, I was thinking, is he scared that this could possibly affect his career, how people can view him, how sponsors can view him? That's what I was thinking, like, man, maybe this guy really needs help and he's saying okay, but he's really not. And again, that's not my decision to make. I just think it's such a universal issue, whether it's you being in the military in a helicopter crash like yourself, whether it's you being in a car accident as a civilian. These are things that go on in people's lives every single day. You know, abuse, drug addiction. There's so many traumatic events that people suffer through that we just try and tough out versus asking for help. And I think personally, it's because of that stigma around asking for help, which I still don't understand it, because I have lost friends to suicide who could have potentially been saved if, one, they would have asked for help, or if, two, we would have recognized the signs of help. So again, I think it's just super important that we bring these things up, that we talk about that, and we make it more normal for people to ask for help, because there's nothing wrong with asking for help. A Marine, a sailor, a soldier, an airman should not be kicked out of their unit for asking for help after they were just in a vehicle accident, after they just witnessed combat for the first time. But that's the first thing that we think of, is like, dang, I really don't want to tell anyone because they're going to kick me out and I'm going to be all alone. No one's going to take care of me. They're just going to screw me over. And I don't think that's fair to that individual. I don't think that's fair of the organization. And I'm not saying any of them do that, but it's just one of those things that we need to continue to talk about. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
So Zach, feel free to comment on it, but I think it really depends. Something that popped in my mind with what you were saying, especially like the Kevin Hart situation, right? At least in my experience with some of the things that I now know were most traumatic to me, I didn't know that they were very traumatic to me at the time. I've been told that's a pretty natural reaction. Your brain takes over and it just says, this isn't a big deal. It kind of takes what you just went through and it ranks it at a lower scale than what it actually is. On the flip side of that, later on down the road, you realize that it was a big deal and it kind of clicks in your head. And now, in my case, I do this a lot. I turn everything into a big catastrophe when sometimes it's not as big of a deal, right? I went from one extreme to the other. I went from the traumatic experience being like, this didn't bother me at all. You know, it's not that big of a deal, to all of a sudden a switch flipped in my head. And now I'm turning everything into a really big deal because of looking back and realizing that it was a big deal. So my brain kind of had issues with finding a balance there, realizing exactly what it is, and then figuring out if it was really that bad, if it was worse than what I'm thinking of, all of those different things. My mind really struggled with that type of thing.
I mean, everybody's different. You know, everybody experiences trauma differently. I definitely agree with both of you. And there's many things. You don't have to be in the military. Trauma affects everybody in this world. Everybody has gone through something and is dealing with stuff. There's not a single person out there walking around that's A-okay. But I think everybody's threshold for stuff like that is different, right? For you, Gerard, right in the beginning when something happened, it wasn't a big deal. But then thinking on it later in life, you're like, oh man, that is a big deal, right? I heard that's very common. For me, I'm the complete opposite. I shut it down, box it up, and put it away. Both things aren't really a great way to deal with things. It's just interesting to me how it manifests in different people. Bringing it back, I think that's why it's so important, like Kevin said, to go out there and to find the help. Me being dumb tough for 4 years, still deploying, still doing stuff in the military is what really, I think, hurt me for sure. I know it did. I know it hurt me. I'm older now. You know, I think the military's come a long ways with mental health as well. It seems to be in the news. The services are all talking about it lately. I'm a big advocate of, if I'd have just taken care of myself back then, I would not be as messed up as I am now.
Yeah, you're right. And like you said, you know, it doesn't just affect military members. So the people who are listening, whether they're military members, whether they're family, whether they're friends, they could be going through traumatic events right now as they're listening to this. And I really hope that if they do, hearing your guys' take and the fact that you're still going through this, but you're still continuing to seek help and willing to open up and put yourself out there for either them, for your doctors, for your family to listen to. I hope they find that helpful and it in some way inspires them to ask for help. Because last time we talked to you, which was maybe 3 months ago on the podcast, 2-3 months ago.
Yeah, it was like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, and I would say, in my opinion, you were in a positive place. And recently, when I talked to you, you kind of seemed to be a little bit down in the dumps. And I was once again bugging you like, hey man, what's going on? Why aren't you texting me back? Why aren't you calling me back, so for everyone that's listening, just because you get help doesn't mean that it's going to completely cure you of all your ailments, your problems. This is going to be an ongoing battle, but if you surround yourself with people who genuinely care, if you seek that help, and if you're willing to put yourself out there, which I can't speak to it because I haven't gone through something as traumatic as like Zach or some of you listening, but I think Zach will stick with me when I say that, yes, the road's not going to be easy, but it is going to make a difference in the lives of you as the individual, as well as those who surround you, whether that's your wife, your husband, your children, your family, your friends. You going down is going to affect a lot more people than just yourself. So I really hope that people listening to this talk to a friend, talk to a family member, someone you trust, and just open up slowly. You don't have to let everything out, but just be willing to at least share that with people.
For sure. I mean, the hardest part, I know for me, and I think for most people, is first admitting to yourself that you're not right, that there's an issue. And second would be to talk to somebody about it. That was the hardest step for me, was actually going and talking to somebody about this stuff. You just alluded to it. I have waves, I struggle with depression or whatever, but I tell you, when I get low now, I come back up a lot quicker than I used to because of all the help and everything I got. And being honest, like I would never be offended if you, Kevin, came up to me, hey, buddy, are you thinking about killing yourself? Like, what's going on, dude? Like, you ghosted me for 3 days now. I mean, I don't take offense to that. If anything, that would bring me up because you're actually showing you genuinely care. But I'm really blunt and open about stuff like that. I don't know if that's the same for everybody, but.
And that's hard, man, because me even thinking about that, like.
Oh, it's rough.
Yeah, I know it's like a possibility, but it's like, how do you ask someone that you care about such an intimate question? There's nothing, in my opinion, more intimate in this world than death. And for you to ask someone, hey, are you thinking about hurting yourself? It's tough, man. It's no easy question, but I've had to do it in the past. I've had to ask friends and family members, and I get choked up even thinking about asking it because I'm like, well, fuck, what do I do if they say yes? Like, if they say yes, they're ready to kill themselves right now. What do I do to walk them off the ledge? It's a scary thing, but like you said, sometimes you need to be blunt. And with situations like this, I think you need to know the person, obviously, but sometimes you just need to have their best interests at heart and ask those hard questions. And one of the things that we really want to share with this is if you guys are listening and you are in a position where you're either a friend, a family member, don't just be a bystander. It's not worth losing someone over something that could have been prevented. There's lots of people that we lose every single year to suicide, to alcohol, to drug abuse because they are struggling with inner demons that they can get help for.
And it's uncomfortable, too. I mean, you said it best. It's scary when you might have that little voice in the back of your head telling you, hey, my friend is struggling to the point where they might be really thinking about hurting themselves, That's kind of a scary thought, and it's also scary to sit there and pose the question because you don't want to insult somebody. At least that's how I felt, because like you, I've had to ask that question as well. You don't want to insult someone. I don't think I've ever been asked that question, luckily, but I feel like I might be insulted. I don't know if that's weird, but if somebody asked me, I'd be happy that somebody cares about me enough to ask that kind of question, but at the same time, I'd be like, well, why would you think that, in the first place? But either way, I mean, there's so many different ways to get some help out there. You mentioned reaching out to family and friends, making sure that you're asking those questions, being aware of some of your friends, especially if they start pulling away from you and things like that. Sometimes it can be really rough with some of those individuals. But one of the good ways, obviously, we want to try and get the information out there for things that can help. There's a crisis line, and I'll just go ahead and throw it out there. If you don't have anybody, then reach out to something like this. Even if you're talking to a stranger, you don't have to worry about anything when it comes to that. A lot of the times it can be anonymous. So that number for the crisis line is 1-800-273-8255, and it says to select option 1. I believe option 1 is going to take you straight to somebody for the suicide line, and to be able to just chat with somebody and really reach out and try and get some help for that whole situation.
You're absolutely right. There's tons of programs out there. You guys picking up the phone, calling crisis hotline, calling different organizations and asking for help. A lot of them stay completely anonymous, which I know for a lot of people is very important. We talked about it. People don't want to be judged. They don't want to have reprimands when they get back to their command and things like that. So it's just another tool out there for you guys to go ahead and get that help. as this podcast is growing, as we're reaching new people, we really want to show that it's bigger than our community. Not all of our family members are veterans. Some of them are civilians. Some of them are first responders. We want to make sure that we are taking care of our community and the community that supports us as well. So thank you for sharing that. Zach, going back to you, we previously touched on it on the episode you and Mark were on, but aside from going to your family for help, we can only do so much as your family and friends. Yes, we can be there to support you, we can be there to guide you, but at a certain point, there is some professional help that needs to be given to you, whether that's prescription medicine, whether that's counseling. Can you kind of briefly touch on that? What is it that the doctors decided was the right treatment for you? And do you think it actually helped you?
I mean, I was really fortunate. I got attached to Wounded Warrior Battalion up at Bethesda. So I was still on active duty. They moved me into the barracks and everything. And my job, even though I was still in uniform, was to go and get better every day. Wounded Warriors, it's a huge organization, and they really do care about service members. And I can honestly say that whole program saved my life. I definitely would not be here today if I wouldn't have gotten that help. They started out with trying to diagnose, is it brain injury related or is it actually like mental health related? I did MRIs, and then I think it was the second or third week, I went in doing group therapy sessions. I did a PTSD group and a cognitive function and speech group, and that helped with being able to think and speak. And then like the group therapy for PTSD, they would focus teaching you like modern day meditation or mindfulness to help center yourself and bring you back down or whatever so you don't freak out. So I was doing group therapy, one-on-one therapy with a psychologist, which really helped. You know, that was part of the whole unboxing, that emotion and traumatic events that happened to me or whatever, which really helped. And then, like you said, that magnet therapy, it's called TMS, transcranial magnetic. I don't remember what the S is.
Can you describe it for us? Because I remember when you were telling me about it, it sounded like something that you would see in a sci-fi movie. Like the way you described it.
I mean, kind of. It's a trip, dude. Like, it is a very localized MRI. You get strapped up into a dentist chair. They lean you back. They like restrict your head and everything. They put this magnet on your head, or a coil, and it's got magnets, and it sends magnetic fields through your head, and you can feel it behind your face, like it kind of going through you. It's really hard to explain. No pain. It doesn't hurt on your head. It doesn't hurt after. You don't get headaches or anything like that. But the ultimate goal, and I'm by no means a scientist about this stuff. I'm just regurgitating information they've told me. But the idea behind it is to wake up the dead neurons that are in synapses that fire in your brain. So it helps improve function. It's rough at first because, like I said, I close off everything, right? I unattach myself from any emotions, especially when I start getting like real low. And then with them kind of waking your brain up, it kind of opens the floodgates to feeling emotion. So the first 2 weeks gets pretty heavy, emotional speaking. You definitely feel more. So it's really good to couple it with one-on-one talk therapy with a psychologist so you can kind of talk it out. Because there is a statistic that shows of the people that participate in TMS therapy, suicidal ideations and depression, there's a sharp rise within the first 2 weeks of it. Because, again, you're waking up the brain. But at the end of it, so far, it's improved my sleep, cognitive function, my mood is leveled out. It's done wonders for me. And on top of all that stuff, I did recreational rehab there, too, which was pretty cool because people would volunteer their time and they would take us all out to go fishing, kayaking, cycling, all sorts of cool stuff. It kind of got us away from the hospital, and we all had, you know, a shared situation, right? We were all going through kind of trying to rehab and get our lives back on track, and we just go out in a group, and it was really cool to spend time with them and talk about something other than Wounded Warrior or have to worry about doctor appointments or therapies and everything like that. So that really helped too. And since I've been out, I've tried to mimic that in the outside world, civilian world, and it's all working out pretty well, man. Probably doing the best I've done in about 5 years. So
those volunteers that you were talking about, were those vets or active duty or civilians?
Yes, and yes. It depended on what group you were in, who was available. And at the end of the day, I couldn't tell you which ones were which. You can kind of guess, but none of us wanted to talk about the military when we did it. We didn't want to talk about doctors. We just wanted to go fish or go kayak or go ride a bike.
That's awesome. What I was kind of getting at there is the idea that there's opportunities for people to kind of get involved, whether you're a vet, whether you're a civilian. a lot of us, like you were saying, Zach, we're all going through some of the same things together. So I don't know, sometimes there's this divide that's there. And I think that it's smart that we make it clear that that divide really isn't quite as big as some people might think.
For sure. Bridging that gap and just giving back to others is a pretty dope thing. And going back to what you were saying earlier, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but the medical side that they're providing you with is helpful, but the idea of family and inclusion and making you feel like a normal human being probably helped speed up your recovery, or at least helped make you happier and given you a little bit better of an opportunity to open up to others. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. That, and it was my wife that brought it up. I was affecting our relationship at home with her and with the kids and everything. And she posed that really hard question asking, was I going to try and hurt myself or whatever? And we had a really open conversation about it. And it sucked seeing her ask it because she was in tears before she even asked it. But I figured if she cared enough then I should care enough to have her come with me to some of these appointments and everything so she can hear it firsthand and be actively involved in it. And it was a good idea. To this day, she still goes to all my big appointments and everything, and we handle it as a family.
I've got a question for you, man, and this is something that I kind of struggled with, and I still have this weird side of me that still thinks this a little bit. It's kind of like this voice in the back of my head when it comes to my experience, which I haven't talked about too much just because I'm still trying to get a good grasp of it. But the question that I have for you, especially going through the whole Wounded Warrior situation, is when you were in there, and I'm sure that you were exposed to a lot of the other individuals that the only way that I can put it is were worse off than you are, as far as amputees, individuals that are just in a really bad spot. Did you ever feel like you were less worthy of the care that you were getting, or did you ever feel like you were being a baby about certain things? I'm trying to word this in certain ways because it's only things that are popping into my head right now, but did you ever feel that?
For sure, man. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can tell you yes, I did, because again, it goes back to those negative thoughts that I talked about in the beginning, right? So on the outside, I looked fine. Before I had the reconstructive hip surgery and everything, I was hobbling around, but I was mobile. I can get around on my own. I looked fine. I looked like I was healthy. And it was real eye-opening when you see guys, triple amputees or people with burn marks, people that you can tell they've been through some stuff. So yeah, I definitely had some negative thoughts about myself. Man, I don't belong here. They're wasting these resources on me. There's somebody more deserving that could be in my spot. Yeah, I definitely had those thoughts. Again, that's focusing on those negative thoughts, portraying that negative image of yourself. And it was really hard for me to get away from doing that. And I still do it to this day, not near as bad, but that's just from learning and going through all these therapies and getting help or whatever. So,
and I'm working through that right now. It was kind of a hard question for me to ask because I struggle with that, and I've actually seen that other individuals struggle with that. For me, that was one of the driving factors to me not going to get help sooner. It really took my wife almost forcing me into going to get some help, mental health help. And that was my driving factors. I was like, I'm fine. I don't have any of those issues. And my justification constantly was there's people that have been through so much more than I have. I saw it. And ultimately that was part of my trauma, is seeing some of that stuff and thinking to myself, those people went through so much more than I did. So I don't need the help. I don't need to go and get help. And I think that's a huge point that I'd like to bring up, is there's so many people that cheapen the trauma that they've been through because you might not be able to see it. You might think that it's less of an issue than what it is because you're comparing it to other things. And I would go as far to say that in society, or even in our realm of like veterans and active duty and all of that, there's that whole idea of like, you're fine, you're good, push through it. But in reality, I had to really fight that. That was huge for me, to fight the idea that I do have issues. Sure, there's people that do have issues that are way beyond mine, but that shouldn't cheapen mine, and that shouldn't stop me from going to get some help.
With you saying, who am I to be here? I'm not a POW. I'm not someone who lost 2 limbs in an IED explosion. That makes sense. I completely get that, and I completely understand that you've had this mentality for so long that, hey, why should I ask for help when there's people that are far worse off than I am? But it took someone talking to me about it, and the way they explained it made absolute sense. The fewer of us that ask for help, the fewer of us that mention problems that we go through, that's less funding that the VA receives. That's less funding that the government is willing to allocate to a lot of these programs. So by you not saying anything, not only are you not getting help for yourself, but you're actually creating a domino effect and not getting help for others. And I'm not saying it, to be rude or anything, but those are the facts.
No, yeah, that's a really good point.
If we don't ask for help, if we have serious issues that we're either too scared to bring up because of how we're going to be judged, because of the repercussions, things like that, if you really think about it, you're affecting a lot more people than just yourself. And that's really one of the biggest takeaways that I want to get across to you guys listening is, if you guys have issues, bring them up. If you guys need to file for disability and stuff like that, whether it's combat related, whether it's not, you guys need to do that because it's going to have a tremendous impact on the community, not just you, but on the entire community. So just think about it like that. If you're one of those people that's like, you know what, people are worse than me, you're right. There are people that are worse than you. And that's why you need to speak up and mention your problems so that government as a whole realizes, hey, you know what? PTSD is a real thing. Trauma is a real thing. And they start allocating more funds to help veterans who have been through these things.
Yeah, specifically for research and studies and everything like that too, and the potential, fixes. Didn't you quote a statistic to me, Kevin, about the sharp rise in like suicidal ideations or whatever in society or something like that?
Yeah, I don't remember it. I think it was like fresh on my mind and it was driving
me
nuts.
It was super eye-opening because it had risen by like 40% or something like that in the last, 5 years?
Yep.
And that's just a result of people reporting it. So you can't even really take that as an honest delta point of information, because that could just be the result of people like yourselves and everybody else trying to get the word out there to seek help. That might be the result of that. But what it does is it creates a reaction. Seeing a staggering number like that, 40% uptick in the percentage of suicidal ideations reported, is an eye-opener to people. Oh man, that's a problem. This is serious. We need to divert some stuff to help fix this. And I think that's the key thing, right? Self-reporting and helping yourself, it's a twofold thing, right? You're going to get the help you need, and then you're helping out the potential people behind you.
Yep, absolutely. Gerard and I talk about why is this podcast important to us. For us, it's just spreading the information, being able to share these stories, and hopefully reaching individuals who realize that, one, there's a community out there that genuinely supports them, and being able to take advantage of these programs that they may have never heard of. I'm just glad that we have the opportunity to talk about this, that we have the opportunity to connect with individuals like yourself, Zach, and people who have been through that and have been through incredible organizations like the Wounded Warrior Program. They've worked with the Red Cross and things like that, because those guys do a tremendous amount of good work and they genuinely care. I would love to keep talking about this, but unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this episode. For those of you guys who tuned in, thank you. We know that this subject is tough. It's not easy to talk about, but like Zach said, you may be in a position where you could save someone's life. Make sure you're asking those tough questions because they do make a difference. Huge thank you to you, Zach, for coming on board to do this with us today. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for listening to The Unwavering. Please rate and comment on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star and a great comment, and we may just read it on a future episode. Also, follow us on social platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Be sure to check back with us next week.